Okay, so in this example, or in this video, I'm going to go over how to do the problem here for the high school student. I'm going to go through the whole program just to kind of give you an example of how you would do this. Okay, so let's define a class. Remember, using system, and then public class. I'm going to simplify this a little bit. I'm just going to call it student. Okay. And before I even read any of this other stuff here, I can at least set up the information here from the UML diagram. So here I have 3 instance variables. One of them is actually an array. And then I have some properties, some constructors. I have a function or a method to calculate the average, determine the letter grade, and then display data, input the data. Alright, so let's go ahead and create our private instance variables here. So that's going to be private string name, then private int grade level, and then I have an array of size 3 of doubles, so that's going to be private double, and then it's called test scores, and it's going to equal new double. Let me zoom out a little bit. New double, and then I need to put the size of 3. Okay, so here I declared the variable test scores, and then I defined it with an array of doubles of 3 of them. Okay, now I need some properties. So those are public string name. Okay, so I can put that there for now. And I'll put the rest of the stuff in it later. Let's just set everything up first. This is int grade level. Then public. Oh, that's it for the properties. Notice that there's no property for the array. For that, you would want to use what's called an indexer. But since that's not covered in the book, I kind of left it out. So you don't have to worry about it for now. But there is a way to you do get a get and set for something that you could use for the array, but for this example it's not necessary, right? But if you're interested in it, you can look up information on that. It's called an indexer. Okay, so then now we have some constructors. We have one called student. This is our default constructor here. And then we have another constructor, an overloaded one, that takes the name as an argument. It takes the grade level, and it takes also an array of doubles. So double tests, let me zoom out, test scores. Okay, so I've set those up. We'll define them later. Then we have I forgot here, public. And then here as well, public. And then here I have public, calculate average. And we need a return type, which goes here. So for calculate average, it's going to return a double. So then this is going to be double here. And of course we have an error right now because we're not returning anything yet, but we will once we finish this. And then we have a determine letter grade function right here. And the return type is string. So then that would be, let me zoom in real quick. That would be public string determine letter grade. Okay. And then what else do we have? We have two more functions, one to display the data and another one to input the data. So then that would be public. The return type is void, so not going to return anything. That's display data. And then we have one more function, public void input data. Okay, so we have our function different headers set up. Now we can go in and actually code all of them. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start going through these instructions here, and I'm going to actually put them in my functions or in my methods, so that way I can look at them and refer to them as I'm coding. Right, so here for the property, see here we have some instructions here. It says write a class called high school student with 3 private instance variables, which we've already done. Include full properties for name and grade level. Do not allow grade levels less than 9 or greater than 12. Alright, so we have here some data validation, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to put it as a comment here in my grade level so I don't forget. Alright, and if you want a multi-line comment, we can go ahead and do that instead. Multi-line comment right here. Actually, I can move this down there. Yeah, so we can have that there so we can just look at it, make sure that we're following that. Now let's look at the instructions for the constructors. Here it says include a default constructor, which we have. Initialize the name property with the string literal John Doe. Initialize the grade property with 12. Using a for loop, initialize the 3 elements of the test scores array with a double literal of 10. So, right, so we'll go through that, but just for now I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to paste it. I'm going to press enter here, try to fit it as many lines as I can, and then just don't forget to close your comments out. Oh, yeah, make sure the comments, the little symbols here don't have any spaces in between. Alright, so we have that information. Now there you go. Try to see if I can copy paste that a little bit easier. I misspelled test scores. Okay, and it says here include an overloaded constructor with the following 3 parameters. Okay, so we did that. So I'm going to get all this. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it here. So put everything on one line, and then I'm just going to press enter a few times. So I can kind of have it here so I can review it. Okay, now let's look at calculate average method. It says here create a method that accepts an array of doubles as an argument and returns a double. Using a for loop, accumulate the sum of the test scores and return the average, sum divided by the number of test scores. We can get the test scores. We can get the number of test scores using the length property. Alright, so sounds good. Let's put that there. Okay, so yeah, putting the comments in like this might seem like a lot of work, but it really helps when you're trying to code everything and making sure you follow the directions, right? You can read through them here. Here's the determine letter grade method. Create a method to determine the student's letter grade based on their average. Hint, use an if-else statement. Alright, that sounds good. I will take that. Alright. Okay. Now, let's see. For this one, write a method to display the name, grade level, average, and letter grade. So very simple. So I'm just gonna, I can put this on one line. And then several instructions here for input data method. So let's go ahead and copy that. We'll go through it a little slower later. Okay. And then make sure you close your comments. Okay, and then we have some more instructions here for the main method. We'll come back to these. All right, we'll put those in the main as well once we're ready for that. Okay, so I'm going to minimize that now. And let's go to the first one here. Here, since there's really no instructions, you're just going to do this like a regular property. And then a set name equals value. Okay. Now here for grade level, the only instruction we have is do not allow grade levels less than 9 or greater than 12. So that won't affect our get method, so we'll just go ahead and set that up. Return grade level. Now the set here, we have a little bit of logic to apply, so let's go ahead and do that. It says here do not allow grade levels less than 9 or greater than 12. It doesn't really say what to do with it, so we can do pretty much anything we want. Probably the best thing is just set it to grade level 9 for 9th grade if they put something that is less than 9 or greater than 12. So if value is less than 9 or value is greater than 12, then set grade level to 9. You can also display an error message if you want. Telling the user what happened. Grade set to 9. Right? However, if the value does not meet this condition, if the value is 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, right, those are valid answers. Right? Since this was supposed to be a high school student, right? High school goes from 9 through 12. So if the user enters anything in that range, then we can set the grade level to whatever the value is that the user entered. Right? So in case they enter something like 8, 8 is less than 9, so I'm going to automatically set it to 9. If the user enters something like 13, 13 is greater than 12, so then this part of this logical statement is true. So then the entire statement is true. So then we're going to set it to just 9. Now if the user enters 10, 10 is not less than 9, and 10 is not greater than 12. So then we go to else, and we accept that 10 as the grade level. Okay. Now here for our constructor, include a default constructor, which we have, or also known as a parameterless constructor. Parameterless constructor. Initialize the name property with the string literal John Doe. Right, so our name property is right there. Initialize it, or we can use the assignment operator, and we'll set it to John Doe. All right, so we've taken care of that. Initialize the grade level property, so that's grade level. Initialize it with the integer literal 12, which is right here, 12. Using a for loop, initialize the 3 elements in the test scores array with the double literal 10.0. Okay. So remember the syntax for loop. That's for, and then your counter. Set it equal to 0. Counter is less than. In this case, we want to iterate over all the elements in the array. Our array is of length 3, but rather than relying on an integer literal like this, it's probably a better idea to do test scores dot length. Right? This property here is also the same thing as 3, right? Because our test scores length, or the size of our array, is 3. So then that's the length, and then we have a property for arrays that will return that value to us, right? So we don't actually have to know how many values there are in our array, right? But here we defined it as 3. But in case we want to modify it later, rather than having to modify it in 2 different places, I'd only modify it up here. And then let's say I had 4 test scores, for instance. I'll just change it there. I'd say I don't need to modify my length. Right? Otherwise, if I had used 3 here, then I would have to set this to 4, or if I change it to 5, then I have to come back and change it to 5. If you use the length property instead, we only need to make the change in one place, so it makes our code a little bit more efficient. And then counter plus plus. And make sure you spell counter correctly. Sorry, counter. Okay. So in talking about the for loop syntax, I forgot what we were supposed to do with a for loop. So again, we have our instructions here. It says initialize the 3 elements in the test scores array with the double literal 10.0. Okay. So we're going to access our array test scores sub counter, and then we're going to set it equal to 10.0, and it's a double, so I'm going to put the letter D next to it. All right, and this will put a 10 in every element in our array. All right, so we're initializing it. Since this is the constructor, the job is to set everything up. So we're just going to set it to 10 based on the instructions. Okay, so with that, I believe we're finished with the constructor. Now let's move on to the next thing. Okay, so include an overloaded constructor with the following 3 parameters. We have name, we have grade level, and we have an array of doubles called test scores, which is right here. So we have that. We did the first part. Now let's move on to the second part. Initialize the name and grade level properties with the corresponding parameters. All right, so again, access the property. So name equals name. All right, so we're talking about this name here. At least I think we're talking about this name. Yes, yeah, we are. And just to verify, if you hover over it, it does say parameter string name, so we are referring to this value here, just to make sure. Then grade level equals grade level, and then here we'll do test scores equals test scores. Alright, so here we definitely have a problem. Here it says warning, assignment made to the same variable. Did you mean to assign it to something else? Right, so there's ambiguity here because we don't have a property. Right, so this test scores has the same name as our array here called test scores. Right, so that's definitely a problem. So it thinks I'm making the assignment to the parameter. I'm setting the parameter equal to the parameter. Right, that's not what we want. What we want to do is we want to remove the ambiguity where we have the same name. We have a name conflict here, and to do that, I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to do this dot test scores equals test scores. Right, so this keyword is referring to the class. Right, if I hover over it, you can see it says class student. So now I'm talking about the test scores that are the instance variable, which happens to be an array, and then I'm setting it equal to the parameter. All right, or I'm assigning the parameter to the test scores, the private instance variable. Right, and that is done through the this keyword. All right, so this meaning the class that we're on. Right, so this class is called student, and that's what we're setting up here. So now the name conflict has been removed. Right, so whenever I want to refer to a variable or a private instance variable that belongs to this class, I can use the this keyword, and you see here it gives me access to all the properties, the variables, everything that's here. Right, but we don't normally use the this keyword because there usually is not a name conflict, because usually we have a property, right, that we can use to initialize everything. but in this case we don't, so that's why we have to do it this way. Okay, so then now I believe we finished with that. Now we can move on to calculate average. All right, here's just create a method that accepts an array of doubles, which we didn't do, as an argument and returns a double. Right, so we have the return type double, but we do not have the argument or the parameter, an array of doubles. So here it's going to be double. It doesn't say what name to use, but we can use test scores. Right. Right. The name is not important. We could set any name we want. Okay. Using a for loop, accumulate the sum of the test scores and return the average. Now, for this, looking at it, the test score should already be saved with the instance variables. They're already part of this class. So it's not necessary to pass the test scores as an argument. So I'm thinking here, in reality this is not necessary, right? Because since the test scores are part of the class already, we don't need to pass them as a parameter. So I guess for this instruction you still could, it would still work, but it's not required, right? Now that I think about it. Okay, so using a for loop, accumulate the sum of the test scores and return the average, sum divided by the number of test scores. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a variable called int sum, and I'm going to initialize it to 0. This is a local variable for this function only. We're going to use it just so we can add up all the test scores, and then once they're all added up, then we're going to determine the average. And thinking about it, I'm just going to kill this parameter off. I'm just going to delete it. All right, so I guess you can ignore this instruction. So I'm going to leave it like that. I don't need it. Okay, and then I'm going to add up all the test scores. So I'm going to do for int, and I can call it counter, I can call it x, I can call my counter whatever I want. And you see I typed the word test scores and I still have access to it. I don't need it as a parameter. X plus plus. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add up all the test scores. So I'm going to do sum, and then I'm going to do the compound operator. So that's plus equals, and then I'm going to add up all the test scores. So oh, sorry about that. The test scores are doubled, so we need a double variable here. Right, okay, so now it works. Right, so we're adding up a bunch of doubles. We want the sum to be a double as well. Right. So I'm going to add up test score 0, test score 1, test score 2, and in this case I guess test score 3, because I changed the size to 4. Right. Okay. Once they're all added up, then I can return the average. Alright, so to return that, I'm going to do return sum, and I'm going to divide it by the number of test scores. The number of test scores is saved in the test scores.length property. Right, so I'm just going to divide by that number, test scores.length. Right. I could have done 4 instead, but if I change my size of my array, then I'm going to need to remember to change what I'm dividing by. Right, I'm going to have to come back here and modify this to 3, 4, 5, whatever. If I use the property, I don't need to. Like I said, I only need to modify it in one place. All right, so it's a better idea to use .length when you can. That's pretty much it for the average. All right. So then here, public string determine letter grade. It says create a method to determine the student's letter grade based on their average. Use an if-else-if statement. Once the letter grade has been determined, make sure the method returns the letter grade. Okay. So in order for us to determine a letter grade, right, if we look at our instructions, again, right, if the average is between 10 and 190, then that's an A. If it's 89 to 80, it's B, 79 C, 69 to 60 D, and anything lower than 60 is an F. Right? Okay, so here what I probably want to do is I'm going to create, since this needs to return a string, I'm going to do string letter grade. So I'm going to create a variable, or I'm going to declare the variable. I'm not going to define it yet. So just declare the variable. And then here I'm going to declare and define the average. Alright, so I'm going to have double average. So I'm declaring the variable, and then when I do the assignment operator, I'm going to define it. The way I'm going to get the average is by calling the calculate average method. Right? So whatever the result of this method will be, that's going to be returned, and it's going to be stored in our average variable. So then now when I want to refer to the average, all I need to do is refer to this double variable here called double average. And so then this is the definition and declaring of the declare and define. Change that a little bit. Declare and define average. Right? I did two things here. Right here, I called the method. Method returns some value. That value is stored in a variable called average. But yet I still don't have a letter grade yet. So that's where my if-else statement will come in. If average is greater than or equal to 90, then my letter grade, you guessed it, is an A. Alright. And then I could do else if average is greater than or equal to 80, then my letter grade is going to be a B. Okay. Else if average is greater than or equal to 70, then that's a C. Okay. And then else if average is greater than or equal to 60, then that's a D. And then anything lower than 60, else, is automatically an F. And grade is F. Right? And then the final thing for my method, because it has a return type of string, then I need to return a string. So in this case I need to return the letter grade. Alright, that's the string I want. Right? I want to know if they got an A, a B, a C, a D, and F. Right? And we can test our if statement. So let's say my grade is 72. Right? Is 72 greater than or equal to 90? No. So then I'm going to skip this block here. Is 72 greater than or equal to 80? No. So then I'm going to skip the letter B. Is 72 greater than or equal to 70? Yes. So then I'm going to determine my letter grade as C. And then the rest of this won't be evaluated. Right? Right? Because once we do find a value, since this is an if else if, then the rest of this will be ignored. Right? So, and then we're left with the letter C, and that'll be what's returned. Okay. So now display data. Write a method to display the name, grade level, average, and the letter grade. All right. That can be done. Okay. So here I'm going to do console dot write line name placeholder. Oh, sorry, I'm going to put my colon here and then the placeholder. And then I'm going to call the name property. Using calling the name property, we'll call the get accessor, and then that will return the name and put it in this placeholder. Alright, so then here I'm going to do the same thing, but for grade level. I could just simply say level. And call the grade level property. Okay, and then here I will display the average, but I don't have the average stored in an instance variable. So the only way I can get the average is by calling the calculate average method. Calculate. Give me 1 second. Calculate average. There you go. Alright, so then that will calculate the average and then return it and put it in this placeholder here. And then finally the letter grade. And then we'll call our determine letter grade method. Okay, so I think we've completed that instruction. Now here's our input data method. It says write a method to acquire input from the user. All right. First, ask for the student's name and assign their input to the name property. Then ask for the student's grade level and assign their input to the grade level property. Next, using a for loop, ask for and assign each test score to each element in the test scores array. Alright, so we have to ask for several things. Right, 3 things that we need. Right, we need the name, the grade level, and all the test scores. So that's what this method is going to take care of. Okay, so here we ask, like enter name, and don't forget your semicolon, and then here we will do name equals console dot read line. Okay, so now we have the name. Now we're going to do console dot write, and then I'm going to ask for the grade level. Enter grade level. And then I'm going to assign that to the grade level property. And then I'm going to make sure that I convert whatever the user types, convert it to a 32-bit integer. Console dot read line. Okay. And then finally, the last thing, we've taken care of step 1, step 2, step 3. Using a for loop, ask for and assign each test score to each element in the test scores array. Okay. So that's going to be very similar to the for loop that we did in the default constructor. So that's going to be for int, and I can call it whatever I want, the counter equals 0, while the counter is less than the size of the array. And then counter plus plus. Okay. And then here what we're going to do is we're going to assign, like it says, assign each test score to each element in the array. Alright, so that's going to be counter. It's going to equal. And then I'm going to convert this time to double. I'm going to convert the user's input. Alright, so the user types something, that something is converted to a double, that double is assigned to the elements in the array. And this counter is the control variable for this loop, so this counter is going to go first from 0, then to 1, and then to 2, and if there's 4 test scores, then it's going to go up to 3. And I think that's it for our class. See, we met all the instructions. I think it was very helpful putting them in comments, putting them actually in the functions themselves. That way it makes your life a little bit easier. All right. Okay, so to save a little bit of time, I went ahead and I set up my student test class with my main function here. And I put all the instructions from the main, I put them in separate multi-line comments, that way I can refer to them and just follow what it tells me to do. So first thing it asks here is to create an array called obj high school students of length 3 to hold the high school student objects. Okay, we can do that. So we have our class called student. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so I have my student class. I'm going to set up an array. It says to call it obj high school. I'm going to take out the high school. I'm just going to do obj students. And I'm going to set it equal to a new student, sorry. And I'm going to set the size like it says here. It says to set it to length 3. Alright, so I'm going to set it to length 3. Okay, so now I have my array called obj students, and it's of size 3. Alright, so the next instruction says, let's see, I'm kind of lower this a bit. Okay. So then here it says, with a for loop, assign an instance of the high school student to each element in the array using the default constructor and call the input method. So we have two things we need to do. So first we have to set up a for loop. Well, I guess 3 things. So for int, and we're going to be using for loops quite a bit from now on, so make sure you're pretty familiar with them. And in this case, this loop is going to run through however many elements there are in our array. This time we're not dealing with test scores. This time we're actually looping through each of the elements of the obj students array. So then I'm going to do obj students, sorry, dot length, and then my counter is going to be counter plus plus. Okay. And first thing the instruction says is to assign an instance of the high school student to each element in the high school student array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all my elements. So then that's counter. And I'm going to set it equal to a new instance, new student, and it says there to use the default constructor, so just open parentheses. Right, so for each element in my array I'm going to put a new student in it. Right, then it also says to call the input data method. So then I'm going to do obj students dot obj counter, because I have to call it for each element, dot, and then input data. Right, so then this input data method will call our input data method, which is here. It's going to call this guy, and it's going to ask for the name, the grade level, and all that good stuff. Okay, and I think that's it for that instruction. Instruction 3 says, with a for loop, call the displayed data for each instance of the high school student. Alright, so we're going to have to traverse through the student array again, but this time we're going to call displayed data. So if you already have a nice for loop set up, then you can always copy and paste that. Alright, it's going to be the same one, right? Because again, it's going to traverse through every element. But this time, we already have our objects set up, so we don't need to call a constructor again. All we need to do is call display data. So I'm going to do obj students counter, and for each element I'm going to call display data. Okay. Okay, so steps 4, 5, and 6, that's kind of something separate. So we'll come back to steps 4, 5, and 6. At this point, we can test out all this other stuff. Make sure everything is working properly. So I'm going to run this. So it's asking me to enter a name. So I'm going to put Nick, grade level 12. Oh, I see the problem. It's asking for test grades, but we don't see a prompt. 60, 70, 80. Oh, we have 4 test scores, 76. You see, so that's definitely a huge problem right there. We don't know what it's asking for. So that means we need to go back here in our input data method. Our input data method, we need to ask for the appropriate test scores. So I'm going to do console.write, and then here I'm going to ask for the test score, enter score, and I'm going to put a placeholder, and I'm going to put counter +1. Right, so that way instead of it asking me to enter grades, enter score 0, enter score 1, enter score 2, instead it's going to show enter score 1, enter score 2, and enter score 3. Right, that's usually how the user would understand it a little bit better. They don't normally understand. I mean, they would understand, but it'd be a little awkward if we left it 0 based. Right, for us, we start at 0 because we're the programmers. but whenever we're trying to display or ask for something and we're going through the array, it's probably a better idea just put +1. This won't modify your counter. It'll only make it go up. It won't modify it, in other words. It'll just display it as the next value, right? So even though it's at 0, it's going to display at 1. Even though it's at 2, or it's at 1, it's going to display at 2. And even though it's the final number in the counter is going to be 2, it'll display at 3. All right. So let's run it, and then I'll take the +1 off, and then you'll see the difference. So that's Nick, grade level 12. You see it's asking for enter score 1, 40, 50, 60, 70. Right, let me take, so you see how it's going 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to take off this +1 here and run it again. Enter Nick, grade level 12. You see now it's doing enter score 0. The same thing. It's just, to the user, they're not going to know what score 0 means, right? And then this is going to be Bob, grade level 11. Enter score 0. It's going to be 80, 45, 100, and 100 again. And then finally we'll do Mary, and her grade level is going to be 13. We'll see what happens there. You see, so the message comes up that says grade set to 9. So now she's been moved from 13th grade all the way to 9th grade. Here I'm going to put 80, 50, 100, and 100. And then I just press enter, and hopefully, if we set this up right, it'll display the average and the letter grades. Alright, so let's see here. So Nick, his level is 12. His average was a 55. He got a letter grade of F. Bob was 81.25. So he has a B. And Mary also has an 82.5. So her grades are very similar to Bob's. So she also has a B as well. Alright, so everything else is working okay here. Alright, so when you're done with the instructions, you may not want them here. They might kind of drive you nuts a little bit. So you can go ahead and remove them. Except here we haven't done these yet, so it might be a good idea to leave those for now until we do those. Okay. So step 4 says create a double array called test scores and initialize each element using an array initializer. Right? An initializer list is probably a better word for that. So to do that, it's going to be double test scores, and we're going to use our initializer list. So that's going to be 90, 89.5, comma 77, comma 43. Okay, so now we have an array, and instead of asking for the input, we just initialized it ourselves using the array initializer list. Okay, so we've met step 4. Step 5 says create one instance of the high school student called obj high school student 4 and invoke the overloaded constructor. For the name argument, use the string literal Thomas. For the grade level argument, use the literal 12. And for the array of doubles argument, use the array created in step 4. Right? Okay. So our class is not called high school student, it's just called simply student. And I'm going to call it obj student 4. And I'm going to set it equal to new student. And if you see here, I have two constructors. I have my default one, and then I have my overloaded one that takes a name, a grade level, and a test score. So now it says here to use the string literal Thomas. So I'm going to do Thomas. comma, grade level, it wants a 12. And for the test scores, I'm going to use the array I created in step 4, and I'm going to do test scores. Okay, so I've completed step number 4. And then step number 6 says call display data for OBJ high school student 4. So then all you do is just do OBJ student 4 dot display data. All right, so we're going to display the information for Thomas. We're going to display his average and everything. So it's just another way of calling the calling this. So that way, using two different constructors. So first we use the default one and we initialize the array, and then here I'm using the overloaded one, and I'm not doing an array. I'm just doing one single object, right? Now another thing that I wanted to show you all was we could make this a little bit more dynamic, right? What if we don't know how many students we have? Right, here we're assuming we have 3 students, right? But what if I want to let the user decide how many students I need to calculate the average for? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a modification to this program, and I encourage you to do it as well. What I'm going to do is here, I don't know this value yet. I don't know if there's 3 students. There could be 20 students. There could be 1 student. I don't really know. So what I'm going to do is here I'm going to remove the assignment operator, and here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to declare an array variable, right? So I haven't actually defined the size yet, so you see that's where this error is coming from. So we don't know the length because we don't know the size. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a local variable called size. So I declared it, but I did not define it either. So it's just a declaration. Declare a variable for size or length. You could, size and length are the same thing, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user to tell me how many students they have. So enter number of students, right? So they could tell me 3, 10, 1. It's up to the user. Okay. Now, for size, I'm going to set it equal to whatever the user types for this question. So this is a bit more of a dynamic array where we don't actually know the size of it yet until we get the information from the user. Okay, so now that we know the size, we know how many students they have, now I can allocate enough memory for the number of students that this user has. So to do that, I'm going to use my array variable, and I'm going to define it now. So I'm going to do obj students equals new student, and here instead of putting 3 like we did before, like this, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the input from the user, and I'm going to put that as the size. All right, and that'll set up an array large enough to accommodate however many students the user has, right? So we'll test it out, and then, but before we do that, just make sure that you realize that here we are defining the array. we're actually telling the computer how much memory to set up for our array variable. Here we just declared it. Right? We say we're going to need an array. But here we're actually telling the computer how big our array is. Right? So that's the difference between declaring and defining. Right? Earlier, the way we had it, we were declaring and defining combined. Right? But in this instance, or in this case, we want to allow the user to choose how many students they want to input. So here I'm going to put just a simple right line, put a little bit of space between all of this. Now let's go ahead and try this out. This should be a little bit more interesting. Okay, so now I'm being asked how many students I have. So in this case, I have, before we had 3, now I'm only going to put 2. Now it asks for the name, so I'm going to do Nick. The grade level, 12. Enter score 0. I'll put 50, 50, 50, and 50. Okay, so now it's asking me for the next student. That's Bob. He has 100. Oh, his grade level, oops, it was set to 9th grade. So he has 100, 100, 100, and 100. He did very well on his tests. So I'm going to press enter. And then now the program finished. And it finished with only 2 students. So we had Nick, grade level 12, average 50, letter grade F. Here we have Bob. He has 9, 100, his letter. Oh, and we have a third student, right? Where did he come from? Well, he came from steps 4, 5, and 6, right? Where we, give me 1 second. Right, he came from this step here, where we declared our own set of values. We defined the object here. We declared and defined it. And then we displayed his data. I forgot about Thomas. Right, but he came from steps 4, 5, and 6. But the other 2 came from the array. To close that out. And then I can run this again. This time I'm just going to put 1 student. Enter name, Nick, grade level 9, and 75, 75, 45, and he made a 33. And I definitely got an F. Right. And if you want to, you could put a little bit of space between each of these outputs, so that way it's a little bit easier to read, right? So yeah, definitely his average is a 57. He has an F. Here, the average is still for Thomas the same, right? And we only had 1 element in our array, right? And of course, this would work if you have put 10 students, 20 students, right? So this is a little bit more useful, right? Because we don't actually know how many students a teacher is going to have. If we want this program to be useful to multiple teachers, each teacher has, of course, different numbers of students. So setting up the array like this instead is probably a better idea. Okay, so I think that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. I apologize that it was so long, but I hope it was helpful. Any questions that you have, you may email me anytime. Thank you very much.